Welcome to the first panel of this very prestigious conference titled Historically Comprehending Christian Zionism. It's really an honor to chair this first session, which will explore key aspects of Christian Zionism, including its definitions, ethical challenges, and enduring narratives. This discussion is both timely and significant. Christian Zionism, in its many forms, has shaped geopolitics, theology, and ethics, influencing societies far beyond its origins. And this panel will provide essential insights into its complex history, ideological diversity, and cultural impact. We are fortunate today to have three distinguished scholars, each addressing a unique perspective on this topic. Their presentations will encourage us to rethink established definitions, grapple with ethical concerns, and reconsider the narratives that sustain this ideology. Each speaker will have 10 minutes for their presentation, after which we will reserve time for your questions and engaging discussions. Please hold your questions until all three presentations are complete. I will start with Dr. Robert Smith. Robert brings a critical, historiographic, and ethical lens to the discussion. He's an assistant professor of history and member of the Chickasaw Nation. Dr. Smith's paper, Christian Zionism, Historiography and Ethical Analysis, examines the movement's global influence, its role in crises such as the destruction of Gaza, and its place in broader global systems. He emphasizes the need for interdisciplinary approaches and activist scholarship to challenge the political and diplomatic power of Christian Zionism. Dr. Smith, please take the floor.
This is a vital moment for this international consultation on Christian Zionism. We see how Zionist settler colonial expansionism and genocide are the default policy positions for all components of the neoliberal political spectrum. In this regard, it is now confirmed that for Palestinian well-being, the so-called left is no more preferable than the ever-intensifying right. A quote. I think part of it is that Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before their faith existed, they, Jews, were there in the time of King David, and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria. That's a quotation from Bill Clinton, speaking on Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. I'm grateful to the Royal Court of the Hashemite Kingdom, to His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi, and Dr. Wasfi Kailani, along with Palestinian Christian leaders like Bishop Munib Yonan and Reverend Dr. Professor Mitri Raheb, for working to realize the vision of this consultation. It could not be happening at a more important time. The academic study of Christian Zionism began in the mid-1990s. Scholars like Donald Wagner, Stephen Sizer, and Colin Chapman, primarily evangelicals critiquing their own tradition, an early example of what is now called deconstruction. And when I began my doctoral studies in the early 2000s, I felt that the topic needed to move past the approach that they had begun, which was more polemical or defensive, moving away from those discourses to a more analytical and academic discourse, seeking to make Christian Zionism a topic we could explore in academic environments. There seemed to be some confusion about what this thing was. And I knew for certain that without a proper diagnosis, there could be no effective treatment. So simply because I had been raised in a Christian Zionist tradition coming out of Oklahoma City in the 1980s, that didn't mean that I fully understood it. I still had much to learn. And so I became convinced that the etiology of a disease needs to be very precise and nuanced before an effective treatment plan can be devised. And so I began developing a definition of Christian Zionism. So that definition is that Christian Zionism is political action informed by specifically Christian commitments to promote or preserve Jewish control over the geographic area now comprising Israel and Palestine. I'm under no illusions that this is a perfect or all-encompassing definition of all the ways that we can discuss Christian Zionism, especially in this consultation. And I thank God that it has been challenged and critiqued by many scholars who have participated in the American Academy of Religion seminar on Christian Zionism that I shared along with Joran Gunnar. But I do believe that this definition still offers some benefits. First, to describe Christian Zionism as political action primarily means that it's not about belief alone. It's about making beliefs manifest in the political sphere. So this is a broad category of possibility, including voting, lobbying, or even joining the Israel Defense Forces as a Christian volunteer, as Swedish scholar Aron Engberg discussed in his ethnographic study. So specifically Christian commitments that drive Christian Zionism. Again, this is vague and undefined because part of the definition seeks to get away from lists of necessary or key beliefs. They're changing all the time of what defines a Christian Zionist belief system. And so it's not confined only to dispensationalist or even literalist belief systems. Indeed, we must now, in this moment, return to Rosemary Ruther's warning about liberal Christian Zionism, informed by official forms of post-Holocaust Jewish-Christian dialogue since Nostra Aetate in 1965. I appreciate the excellent work that Mitri has done to address this problem in the US and European church institutions. And then finally, to promote or preserve Jewish control over the land. Now, this part of the definition is most important for my initial study of Christian Zionism since it opens the timeline. To promote or preserve means that Christian Zionism is not the result of the fundamentalist movement in the United States or any form of premillennial dispensationalism. It is rather at the foundation of both of those intellectual trends within Anglo-American Christianity. Early studies of Christian Zionism got the order flipped around of what came first. Even more importantly, Christian Zionism is in no way dependent on the existence of the State of Israel or the movement of Jewish political Zionism. The timeline shows the opposite. Christian Zionism first manifested in 1649. Herzl would not have had political success without the direct assistance of established Christian Zionist leadership from Europe. Christian Zionism is at the heart of the success of Jewish political Zionism. One comes before the other. So I argue instead that Christian Zionism emerged in the Reformation period as a mythical structure in which Catholicism and Islam, the belief systems that the early evangelicals thought were the enemies of the Pope and the Turk, were to be defeated by a new people of God formed by an alliance of Protestant believers and Jews, designated in the biblical story as God's chosen people. Again, this belief system was in full effect in 1627 and 1649. The problem was that many of those early Christian Zionists had never met any flesh and blood Jews. They were literary beings, mythical allies through which early Protestants had access to chosenness. This new mythology emerged at the same time as transatlantic colonialism and the emergence of the nation-state itself, providing the source code of the national identity of the United States. Friends, we're dealing with a deeply woven problem. Again, my definition was developed back in 2011 or so as I wrote my doctoral dissertation while working at the church-wide offices of the ELCA under Bishop Hanson and Bishop Malpica. And it's certainly received its fair share of critiques, but my sense is that the components of the definition still have relevance to our conversation. And for me, though, that definitional work is a prelude to what we need to accomplish in this consultation. A definition of this sort helps move us toward an historical and ethical critique of Christian Zionism rather than the simpler goal of disproving the legitimacy of Christian Zionism within faith communities. The myth is too deeply woven for mere disproving to be politically effective. It may be satisfying on an individual or small communal basis, but we're facing a societal, if not civilizational, problem. Because Christian Zionism is connected to all sorts of historical and ethical injustices and travesties, including white Christian nationalism, territorial expansionism, coloniality, and gender injustice. The effort to confront Christian Zionism, therefore, must be an intra-Christian and interfaith conversation. Exactly what we are doing here today. I'm deeply grateful that this consultation has been realized and manifested. It's vital that it be an interfaith conversation because the ethical critique of Christian Zionism is that it constructs religious others for its own purposes. This is true of Christian Zionist anti-Jewishness and eventually anti-Semitism, and also its Christian Zionist philo-Semitism, which is no less unethical. But it's perhaps more poignantly true of Islamophobia. Christian Zionism fuels conflict between our worlds. Like Samuel Huntington's idea of a clash of civilizations, Christian Zionism provides a self-fulfilling prophecy to global order. And so it's vital that we discuss Christian Zionism in a multi-faith context. This is likely true also for discussions of how Christian Zionism increases interfaith communal tensions in other contexts, disrupting communities that had relative conviviality and harmony along with difference. But alongside the interfaith, it's vital that this is also an intra-Christian conversation, not ecumenical, since it's about bringing Christians of the same confession who belong to globalized traditions together. We already have doctrinal unity within our traditions. But what we need now is ethical, political, and practical unity, not doctrinal unity alone. So friends, now in this time, it's clear that we must consider Christian Zionism a pressing matter for diplomatic and security conversations because through its liberal and progressive form, it has shown itself willing to support genocide, and that there's no practical policy distinction between the conservative and liberal forms. And therefore, as we critique Christian Zionism alongside white Christian nationalism, we must confront all forms together. I'm so glad to be doing that work with you in these 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Our next speaker is Dr. Gary Berg. Gary is a New Testament scholar and former dean of faculty at Calvin Seminary. In his paper, Christian Zionism as a Modern Mythology, he reframes Christian Zionism as a millenarium narrative that offers believers belonging, purpose, and divine assurance. Dr. Berg unpacks the biblical and mythological elements that underpin this ideology, shedding light on its enduring appeal and its implications for theology and politics today. Dr. Berg, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Dr. Mitri Rahib and His Royal Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed for this invitation to be with you this week. I'm honored to be here. Each of us, I imagine, in this room have extensive experience with Christian Zionism. Because I have worked and lived in evangelical American spaces for many years, I have found myself in debates with their leaders, both in person and in print. But here I would like to approach Christian Zionism in a very different manner I have never done before. Christian Zionism is indeed shaped by an unfortunate biblical theology. Its misuse of the Abrahamic narrative, its confusion about biblical covenants, and its eschatology applied to modern Israel are clear, and they have led to grieving among theologians like me. Christian Zionism is also shaped by an unfortunate political ideology. It springs from the crudest form of ethnic nationalism, but the fog has cleared, and if some don't know about the Palestinian expulsions after the Nakba, they can watch today in Gaza as this shows what an ideology can do. But for the present, my interests are not these. I can be in a debate about both esoteric topics in the academy or practical subjects inside of the church and enjoy a lot of charitable disagreement. But my discussions with Christian Zionists are different. You've seen it. The conversation becomes heated, the arguments are visceral, and you sense that this isn't just about ideas. It is about something else. And that's what I would like to explore. Christian Zionism is a mythology. Now, once I say this, I immediately want to clarify I am using this word in a specialized manner. This is not about the truth of a story or whether it is a fantasy. I'm talking about how a story functions in relationship to a society or to a person. I'm thinking about scholars like French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, Romanian Mircea Eliade, and the American scholar Joseph Campbell, among others. These men knew each other. They were also known to J.R.R. Tolkien, but that's another story I'll come to. They represent a century-old effort at the intersection of anthropology, religion, philosophy, and history that works to define the word myth. Myths, they say, describe our rituals, our religious beliefs, our symbols, and they are located in deep themes inside of our cultures. For example, I once questioned the Alamo story in San Antonio, Texas, and as I now know, you don't do that. It is mythological. Joseph Campbell was perhaps the best popularizer of myth study in the 20th century in the English-speaking world. And he could tell you what Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, The Lion King, and Toy Story all had in common. Or he could explain why the eagle and the snake are recognized in almost every world culture, and how they evolve into a flying dragon and why it must be defeated. These are archetypal motifs, Campbell noted. He called them monomyths, like the hero's quest or the journey inward. These are things that we reach for unconsciously. Myths help us. I have them, you have them, Disney has them, and has produced 12 films using them. It's a remarkable thing. In a word, myths have enormous explanatory power. They provide me with ancient wisdom, perhaps a divine secret. And I am the privileged one who can understand these things. Myths explain my place in history, the quest before me, and the virtues that I need to hold as I pursue my quest. Where is history going? My myth tells me. Tolkien, as you know, Lord of the Rings, was an expert at Nordic myth, and this is woven through Lord of the Rings, and some of us won't recognize that. We cheer Samwise Gamgee and Frodo in their hero quest, and we weep when they are at the precipice of Mount Doom in Mordor. This is an ancient story. This may be our story. Now, myths appear in symbol throughout our art, music, and literature, and here is one of the most famous expressions of it. Should I use this to advance? Okay. There we are. Okay. This is a very famous American painting, one of the most famous from the 19th century, and if you don't recognize it, you may have forgotten from an early class in art, but I would encourage you to go ahead and find it on the internet and expand it because of its detail. This is from John Gast, who completed it in New York in 1872, and what Gast is trying to capture here is the myth of manifest destiny that appears in American thinking. Now, if you look closely here, I'll see if I can, you can see here, this is Columbia. She is now given a kind of angelic or divinized image, and she is leading the westward expansion of American culture. So if you look to the right of the picture, it is light, the sun is coming up, and if you look to the left, it is dark, because this is uncivilized. You can see a city with ships in the right, you can see trains, you can see covered wagons, stagecoaches. In the bottom right, you can see they're bringing the plow to cut the land. In the middle of the bottom, you can see there are men who are ready to shoot the animals. So she is actually carrying not a Bible, but she's carrying a school book, because they are bringing civilization west, and she's carrying a telegraph line which is going to connect the West to the modern world. But if you look to the far left, you can see bears and buffalo are fleeing to get away from this if they can. And if you look very, very closely, you can see that the Native Americans who are there represented are savages, and that is all symbolized in the art depiction. So this is the picture. I think it's an important picture to help us understand what manifest destiny looks like. You would not be the first person that looked at something like this and would recognize not only is the American myth something that we can very clearly put on a screen, but this is also the same myth which drives modern Israel. So Columbia leads the expansion west. She's wearing the Star of Empire on her forehead, and she is leading civilization's defeat of Indian and buffalo and going to remove the darkness. The sun is rising in the east, and America is bringing light to the world. Now, what happened with this is many scholars looked at it and they said, well, okay, so there are myths which are working inside of our cultures, and there are 4 features which have found consensus in myth study. First of all, there is what we call the mystical spiritual function for a myth inside of a culture. This is a story that inspires awe. It cannot be analyzed or taught. It is experienced and therefore self-validating. It may feel transcendent, and it's at the heart of every religion. It is why a friend of mine cried when he watched Samwise and Frodo struggle at the lava cliff in Mount Doom. It was an ancient story. It was a timeless story. It was his story of temptation. Number 2, the cosmological function. This is a story that interprets the world and its history. And when I despair of life in the world, the experience of awe changes the way I see everything. History, politics, religious movements, mundane affairs now become sacred because the myth connects me to an ancient divine narrative. This gives me profound comfort. 3, the sociological function. This is a story that is shared and nurtured inside of a community that cultivates rituals and symbols as reminders of the story. The story then is imprinted on us, and we know our role, and we become participants together in a community as the story is unfolding. So ours is a sacred community doing sacred work, and this gives me enormous satisfaction and belonging. 4th, the psychological function of mythology. This is a story that guides me through life. Humans in every culture have always felt anxiety about the future centered on death and failure. But now I know the outcome of the great story. I know that I am on the right side, and this gives me enormous peace. Now, let me rework these things in doing a kind of theological context, and I will make them very short, and you'll see it clearly. All 4 once again. Number one, I feel newly connected to God and I know His will. Number two, I understand where history is going because I know the great story written by God. Three, I belong to a host of people who are working together on behalf of the great story. And four, I have peace because I know God's heart and how I fit in. Now, stepping into a mythological story is deeply meaningful. It grounds us and fills our lives with confidence and purpose. So if you challenge something that has given me this much solace, you are challenging something that lives at the very center of my life. Now, it doesn't take too much imagination to see how each of these classic four functions of myth operate in Christian Zionism. Let me revisit now the four, taking on the voice of a Christian Zionist. Number one, I have embraced a story that has transformed my faith in God. I see now how God is working in the world, and I've chosen to participate. I am united with God in this journey. Israel is not just a nation, it is God's nation, and I am working with God when I promote Israel. Number two, the meaningless and despair of history feels less threatening now. History has a purpose. It is moving toward a target, and the one test today is whether or not you are standing with Israel in its future. All of the world has watched the miraculous rebirth of Israel, its success against larger foes, and how God always keeps it safe. This story may be the final story that ends the world, but I am not afraid because I know the secret story, the great story, and the world doesn't really understand how God has written it, but I do. Thirdly, I belong to a church that believes this great story. I'm part of a global family of believers who have deep faith in God, understand history rightly, and are willing to join with Israel in a divine plan. I am not alone. I'm on God's side, but I'm standing with people more than I ever imagined I would. It's thrilling.
Time.
Fourth and last. I used to be a pessimist about everything. I despised history. I was anxious about world politics. Disease, war, the environment, the economy, these filled me with dread, and I worried about where our country was going. But I felt like things were out of control. But now I feel enormous peace because I see that God is in control. Now, these are the four elements that most of the studies of mythology concluded actually operate in a mythology, and I'm convinced that this is exactly what fuels Christian Zionism today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next and final speaker is Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahib. Mitri, as you all know, is the founder and president of al-Kalima University in Bethlehem, and thanks to him, we're all here. And he's the most widely published Palestinian theologian. In his paper, Christian Zionism and its effects on the Christians of Palestine, Dr. Rahib challenges traditional, narrow understandings of Christian Zionism and expands the conversation to include diverse theological and academic perspectives. His work highlights how Christian Zionism supports settler colonialism and invites us to consider its manifestation in today's world and its effects on the Christians of Palestine. Dr. Rahib, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carol. And actually, we forget to introduce Carol, a great friend, Dr. Carol Daniel Kasperi. She is the director of the Conflict Resolution Program at the Carter Center in Atlanta. And I think today we miss President Carter very much, his voice. And she leads the Christian Task Force for Palestinians at the Carter Center, which we actually work on together. Great to have you here, Carol. And I'm thankful for my colleagues Robert and Gary, because I think what you see here today at this conference is really, it's a different approach to Christian Zionism. And we want this approach actually to be the approach in the academia, and that will help us understand Christian Zionism. So I changed my title because I knew Robert is going to talk about his definition, and our definitions are very close to each other, which is great. But I will talk about Christian Zionism and the effects on the Christians of Palestine. My time starts now, Carol. So the question I would like to deal with is, how did Christian Zionists deal with indigenous Christians of Palestine? That's the question that I would like to look at. And I'll do it historically. I will not start with the 15th century because that's Robert's terrain, but I would like to start in the 19th century based on Robert's work. And I would like to start with these two, quickly, with these two young people, Levi Parsons and Pliny Fisk. On October 31st, 1819, they gave their sermons before coming to Palestine. They were the first two missionaries to come to Palestine. And if we analyze that these two sermons, and I know that John worked his doctoral on one of them, we can see three elements that are very important in Christian Zionism. So first, they were talking about the restoration of the Jews, whatever restoration means, and they have a special interest in the land called Palestine. Secondly, they have a desire to conquer the Muslim world, whatever conquer means, political, military, religious, and they have a condescending attitude towards the local Christians of the East who are in a dire need for a reformation. And guess what? Who is at the bottom of this? Catholics are worse than Muslims in their thinking, and I think Robert talked about that. So these three elements we will see, repeating themselves in different ways along the 200 years history. So I move from there to the British Empire. If we look at the Balfour Declaration, which again was influenced by Christian Zionist thinking, as Balfour himself said, we can see actually that, Christian Zionism was basically the software that was operating in the empire. And the empire was interested in Palestine, not in the Jews, but really in Palestine for socioeconomic and political reasons, never for the indigenous people. This is what empires do, and I think the pictures the painting that Gary showed us speaks to that. And European Jews were seen as subcontractors of the empire. This is important. Christian Zionists did not see the indigenous Christians at all. They are not mentioned in the Balfour Declaration. Muslims are not mentioned, though they constituted 95% of the people of Palestine. They were described as non-Jews, so they don't have identity. They are only interesting in relation to Judaism, thus as subordinate to Jews. They are not seen as people, only Jews are seen as people, but Christians and Muslims are seen as sectarian communities. And so sectarianism comes there to play. And a hierarchy, we see a hierarchy where white Western Christians sit on the top of the pyramid. Beneath them are European Jews, followed by the others. Robert talked about the othering, meaning Muslims and Middle Eastern Christians. This is the pyramid that we see. I move quickly to the Holocaust. Now, in Nazi Aryan racial hierarchy, Jews were low on the purity scale and were considered a threat to Germany. And Arabs were not better off, as you know. Now, in most of the theological writings, 19th century, before, after, Judaism was seen as inferior to Christianity. And this is important because it's still there. Now, the United States was the rising star, the rising empire of that time, and they were ready to take over the driving seat in world politics. In this context, we see they coined the phrase Judeo-Christian. Judeo-Christian in the 19th century referred to Jews who became Christians, converts. Now, in the 40s, and it only was coined really in 1940s, this phrase, Judeo-Christian was reinvented as a descriptor of the United States and a code for a unified Judeo-Christian cultural identity of an American civil religion over and against fascist Europe on the one hand and communism on the other. So this was now really what the United States was proud of. And the Holocaust actually helped, and this Judeo-Christian, to rehabilitate Judaism and to elevate it to be on equal footing of Western Christianity. So now Judaism was inferior, now Judaism is on equal footing. Now, to fully rehabilitate Jews, they had to be declared white. And this is exactly what was done in 1944 by Roosevelt signing the G1 bill that you can see here in the picture. Now, this Judeo-Christian code was meant as, and still is, a white Western Judeo-Christian ideology. It's Western-wide. It is white Western Christians and white Ashkenazi Jews seen as belonging to the same tribe. And if you look at Christian-Jewish dialogue until this day, it's white people talking to each other. There is no religious pyramid anymore, but a polarized world of a white Western Judeo-Christian world against the others, irrespective of they are Humanists, Muslims, or Middle Eastern Christians, or even Palestinian Jews. Now, between the Nakba and the Naksa, the establishment of the State of Israel with a biblical name, in the 50s and 60s, European churches and theologians started to rehabilitate Judaism theologically. Especially Karl Barth was here very important. So all the problems we have has to do with Karl Barth. Sorry if you love Karl Barth. For Palestinians, he's the most terrible theologian to date. And all of his disciples the same, by the way. All of them, they were to create the liberal Christian Zionism. So the majority of churches, I have to say that, insisted to understand the State of Israel as a geopolitical entity rather than a theological one. So we should not just, throw everyone in the same pocket. Still, while theologically the majority of churches developed theological affinity, and this is important, to Jews and Israel, the loss of Palestinian land, of Christian and Muslim Palestinian land, was seen as a collateral damage that needs only a humanitarian support. And this is when DSPR, Pontifical Mission, and LWF work was started in Palestine as response to the Nakba, but in a humanitarian way. So theologically, people were on Israel's side, humanitarian on the Palestinian, and this is until today the case. Now, Mark Barth, who is Karl Barth's son, was the only one who noticed there is something problematic here. So in 1975, he published his book, The Jewish Jesus, Israel, and the Palestinians. Okay, and here you see him with his father. Now, very important, from the 60s to the 80s, Western churches created vehicles to expand this liberal Christian Zionism. And this is very important. Here I hope I'm not... The STI for the Swedes was established. Sorry for the Swedes here. Now they are better, much better. But they were started as liberal Christian vehicle. Ratisbon for the Catholic in 1970. Studium in Israel in 1978. If you look at all church leaders today in Germany and why they are so anti-Palestinian, all of them almost came out of this program. Kaspari Center for the Norwegian, and on the Jewish side, Shalom Hartman Institute, 1976. He promoted liberal Christian Zionism. On the evangelical side, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem in 1982, and it was created in a stolen Palestinian Christian home in the Nakba. All of these were Western endeavors without much connection to the local Palestinian Christians. We were not inside. So the 1967 war, I will skip this because we will hear a lot about American Christian nationalism, so within this framework, actually, Palestinian Christians were seen as what I call brown, crypto-Muslim Christians. This is how they look at us. Relations are developed only with very conservative Palestinian Christians who buy fully into the Christian Zionist narrative, creating a pseudo-Christian Zionist Palestinian Christians. These local pseudo-Christian Zionist Palestinians, though still inferior to Western Christians, are bought by American Christian funding and instrumentalized to prove the validity of the Christian Zionist discourse and utilized towards an Islamophobe narrative. They are played against the local Christian community. These pseudo-Palestinian Christian Zionists are elevated over and against the non-Zionist Christians. So a hierarchy is created among the Palestinian Christians themselves. And if you look at the Christian Century podcast that came out, the last one, you will see exactly that's on the place. And finally, a last word about the liberal Christian Zionism relations to indigenous Palestinian Christians today. So Christian Zionist mainline churches try to interfere in the life of the indigenous churches in many ways. For example, interfere in intra-church politics. When the Anglican Church actually elected Elijah Khoury as bishop, the Archbishop of Canterbury refused to have him as a bishop. This is just one, and I can tell you many other examples. Preferential treatment, including funding for pastors with a pro-Israeli attitude and sideline those fighting for Palestinian freedom, and boycott others who talk about settler colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. So if you use any of these words today, you will not get funding from any German organization. Push Palestinian theologians to engage in Jewish-Christian dialogue on Western epistemology. Talk about promised land, elections, all of this. And I can tell you stories about that. Liberal Christian Zionism is seen as the true and contextless theology with global validity to be adopted by indigenous Palestinian theologians if they were to seen as kosher. And the land belonged to Israel in liberal Christian Zionism, no question about it. The local Christians should be happy to live under Israeli rule. We should be thankful to God that we are persecuted and should become peacemakers between Israeli and Palestinians. That's the narrative. Now, and this is the last one, a colleague of mine, Dr. Yusuf Khoury, a Gazan Christian, he coined the phrase ecclesiocide. This is what's happening. With the help of liberal as well as evangelical Christian Zionists, there is an ecclesiocide happening in the context of genocide and settler colonialism. Actually, by 2050, I'm afraid there will be no Christians left actually in Palestine, thanks to all these great Christians in the West. Thank you.